2 carrier groups, 1 expired deadline, and a Supreme Court case that could force the Treasury to return $1 trillion by June 2026. Most people are watching the missiles. The data says, watch the vault. This is not financial advice. I am not a licensed advisor. Your capital is your responsibility. Always conduct your own research. Here's what the mainstream narrative gives you. The USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford are currently positioned in the Arabian Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. The headlines call it maximum pressure. Pundits on every network are telling you this is a negotiating tactic, a show of force designed to bring Tehran back to the nuclear table before things escalate. That is the official story, and it is precisely the kind of story that has been run before. You see, the carrier groups are not the threat, they are the distraction. While every camera in the world is pointed at the flight decks, the real detonation is happening inside a federal courtroom. On February 20th, 2026, today, the Supreme Court is actively weighing the legality of President Trump, his emergency tariff authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The consolidated cases are Trump versus VOS Selections and Learning Resources, Incorporated versus Trump. The mechanism at stake involves $130 billion in seized import revenue, which means if the court strikes down the IEEPA tariff authority, the Treasury does not just lose a legal argument. It may be legally obligated to refund $1 trillion to trade partners and importers by June 2026. $1 trillion. Returned. In 4 months. Let that sequence process. The United States is simultaneously staging a kinetic military operation in the most oil-critical shipping corridor on the planet, while a 9-member court is deciding whether the executive branch has the legal authority to fund it. This is not politics. This is a structural fault line. The data shows that every major imperial overextension in recorded history follows the same sequencing. Military escalation timed precisely with a domestic fiscal crisis that the public cannot yet see. Rome did it in 378 AD before Adrianople. Britain did it in 1956 before Suez. The script is not new. What is new is the speed. Now, here is where most analysts stop. They see the carrier groups, they calculate the oil disruption, they write the inflation piece. But there is a second layer buried in this file that those analysts are missing entirely. Because the IEEPA case is not just about tariff revenue. It is about what happens to dollar credibility the moment a US court signals to every foreign central bank on the planet that the executive branch's financial weapons can be retroactively dismantled by the judiciary. Think about what that signal transmits. If you are sitting in Beijing and Riyadh, in New Delhi, and you are holding US dollar reserves as your primary strategic asset, you are now watching a live constitutional crisis determine whether those dollars can be weaponized against you, and then unwound in a courtroom 4 months later, which means the carrier groups are not projecting strength. They are projecting desperation dressed in steel. The 15-day deadline President Trump issued in early February 2026 for Iran to accept new nuclear preconditions, it has passed, quietly, with no framework, no agreement, no extension announced, just 2 aircraft carriers, a Supreme Court docket, and a Treasury that may be legally insolvent before summer. If this forensic sequence is already opening a new frame for you, if the mechanism underneath the headline just became visible, then you are already thinking differently than 99% of people watching this crisis play out on cable news. This channel exists for the 1% who read the fine print before the headline. If that is you, join the Forensic Circle now. Hit subscribe. The next file is already in production, and it changes the timeline completely. But here is what we have not touched yet. We have not talked about who is on the other side of this strike. Not Iran, not the IRGC. The entity I am referring to moved 16 aircraft into Iranian airspace in 56 hours in late January 2026, delivered electronic warfare systems with a combined payload capacity of over 1,056 tons, and is currently running joint naval drills in the northern Indian Ocean, designed to do one specific thing: close a strait. And when that strait closes, a number printed on a silver contract at the COMEX exchange in New York becomes mathematically impossible to honor. That number, the mechanism behind it, and the name of the alliance running this counter-operation. The name you were not given is Crink: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Not an alliance in the diplomatic sense, not a treaty bloc with a charter and a headquarters. Something more dangerous than that: a logistical counter-architecture, assembled quietly, piece by piece, while Western analysts were busy counting sanctions. The data shows it is already operational. Here is what the public record reveals. In late January 2026, 16 Chinese Y-20 military cargo aircraft, designated the Kunpeng, executed a strategic airlift into Iranian airspace. 56 hours. Start to finish, 16 aircraft, 66 tons of payload capacity each, which means the People's Liberation Army Air Force surged over 1,050 tons of high-end electronic warfare systems directly into Iran, without a single refueling stop. without a single NATO intercept, without a single headline in the Western press that lasted more than 48 hours. You see, the Y-20 is not a transport plane in the conventional sense. It is a strategic projection tool. The same class of aircraft that allows China to move armored assets to contested zones in the South China Sea was just used to fully re-equip Iran's electronic warfare grid in under 3 days. Which means when the U.S. Abraham Lincoln strike package leaves the flight deck, it is not flying into the electromagnetic environment of 2023. It is flying into a system that was designed in Beijing to counter exactly that strike package. The math on that is not political, it is engineering. Now here is where most analysts stop. They call it an arms deal. They call it Chinese support for Iranian proxies. And they are not wrong, but they are not seeing the second layer. Because the airlift is not the operation. The airlift is the preparation for the operation. The operation is called Maritime Security Belt 2026. Here is the forensic file on that designation. The Iranian Navy, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval forces, and active Russian and Chinese naval assets are currently conducting joint exercises in the northern Indian Ocean. The stated purpose? Maritime security coordination. The actual purpose, when you read the operational geometry, is a live rehearsal for a Strait of Hormuz closure scenario. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes through that corridor, in a single choke point. And right now, the three nations with the most advanced anti-ship missile technology outside of the United States are running coordinated drills inside it. You see, this is not a deterrent posture. A deterrent posture involves visibility, press releases, diplomatic backchannels. What Maritime Security Belt 2026 involves is radio silence, live fire coordinates, and an electronic warfare grid that was freshly installed by 16 cargo planes in 56 hours. That is not deterrence, that is prepositioning. Which means the question you should be asking is not whether a strike happens. The question is, what gets broken the moment the strait closes? And the answer to that question is buried in a number that most people have never heard of: 20 million. Here's the context. The COMEX exchange in New York is the primary settlement venue for silver futures contracts in the Western financial system. Registered silver, the metal that is actually available for physical delivery against open contracts, has been draining from COMEX vaults at a rate of 20 million ounces per month. That drain began accelerating in mid-2025. It has not reversed. At the current extraction rate, the registered inventory enters a structural delivery failure window inside 12 months under normal market conditions. Now here is the application. That drain is happening under normal market conditions. No war, no strait closure, no inflation shock. Just the steady, quiet accumulation of physical metal by industrial buyers, defense contractors, semiconductor manufacturers, solar panel producers, who have watched the paper price and decided the risk of non-delivery is no longer acceptable. Which means they are bypassing the exchange entirely. They are going directly to refiners, directly to vaults, paying a premium above the printed COMEX price to secure physical supply. The paper price of silver as of this filing is $78 per ounce. The physical premium in the industrial market is already running significantly above that number in direct contracts. That gap between the paper price and the physical reality is called backwardation. And backwardation in a commodity market is the mathematical fingerprint of a system that is lying about its inventory. Now here is the head fake most people fall for. They look at that gap and they think silver will go up when the war starts. That is the wrong frame. Silver does not simply go up. The paper silver market breaks. Those are two completely different events with completely different consequences for your capital. You see, when the Strait of Hormuz closes, even temporarily, the inflation signal it sends into the global commodity market does not move through the normal channels at normal speed. It moves like a detonation. Oil spikes, energy costs spike, industrial input costs spike. And every defense contractor, every solar manufacturer, every semiconductor plant that was already bypassing the COMEX accelerates that bypass into an emergency procurement posture, which means the 20 million ounce monthly drain does not stay at 20 million ounces. It goes vertical. And the COMEX, which is already operating on a registered inventory that cannot cover its open interest at current drain rates, cannot settle, which means the $78 paper price is not a price. It is a fiction, a legally maintained fiction, built on the assumption that physical delivery will never actually be demanded at scale. The moment that assumption breaks, and Maritime Security Belt 2026 is a live rehearsal for breaking it, the price discovery mechanism does not correct. It ruptures. The forensic data points toward a physical silver reality above $100 per ounce in a straight closure scenario, not as a prediction, as a mathematical consequence of the inventory data that already exists. Here is the framing. You're not watching a regional conflict between the United States and Iran. You are watching the Crinky architecture execute a sequenced pressure campaign against the three pillars that hold dollar hegemony in place. Pillar 1, the petrodollar, The agreement that oil is priced in dollars, which forces every nation on Earth to hold dollar reserves. The Strait Closure attacks that pillar directly. Pillar 2, the legal authority of U.S. financial sanctions. The IEEPA mechanism that allows Washington to freeze assets and seize revenue as a geopolitical weapon. The Supreme Court case attacks that pillar from inside. Pillar 3, the paper commodity markets. The COMEX and LBMA pricing structures that allow the United States to suppress the price signals of gold and silver, maintaining the illusion of dollar stability. The physical drain attacks that pillar from below. 3 pillars, 3 simultaneous pressure points, 1 coordinated sequence. That is the smoking gun. That is what 16 cargo planes and a joint naval drill and a Supreme Court docket on the same calendar look like when you map them as a system instead of separate news stories. The forensic circle exists because this level of pattern recognition does not come from a cable news chyron. It comes from reading the operational geometry behind the headline. If you are already running this analysis in parallel, cross-referencing the legal filing with the airlift manifest and the vault drain data, then you belong here. Subscribe. The next file in this series maps the specific timeline, but before we get there, we need to go further back. Because Crink is not the origin of this sequence. It is the latest iteration of a pattern that has dismantled 3 global empires in the last 400 years. And the specific stage of that pattern the United States just entered is the stage that none of those empires survived. There's a number that no empire has ever survived. 250, not as a prophecy, not as a philosophy, as a data point. In 1978, a British military historian named John Glubb published a study called The Fate of Empires. He had spent decades mapping the lifespan of every major empire in recorded history. The Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire under Alexander, the Roman Empire, the Arab Caliphate, the Spanish Empire, the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. He was not looking for patterns, he was looking for variants. He wanted to find the exceptions, the empires that broke the cycle. He did not find any. What he found instead was a number so consistent across 3,000 years of data that he called it a statistical constant. 250 years. From the first generation of conquest to the final generation of collapse, no empire in the dataset exceeded that window by more than 1 standard deviation, which means the Glubb curve is not a theory. It is a forensic finding. And the United States declared independence in 1776. You see, 2026 is not a random year on this channel. It is a mathematical deadline, 250 years from the founding document, to the month. Now here is where most people stopped and say, that is a coincidence. That is the point at which the forensic file gets interesting. Because Glubb did not just find the lifespan, he found the sequence inside the lifespan, the same sequence, every time. Stage 1, the age of pioneers. A new power emerges through conquest, exploration, and raw productive energy. Stage 2, the age of commerce. Wealth accumulates, trade networks expand, the empire becomes the center of global exchange. Stage 3, the age of affluence. The merchant class gives way to a financier class. Hard assets give way to paper instruments. The culture shifts from production to consumption. Stage 4, the age of intellect. Universities multiply. Debate replaces action. The empire begins arguing about its identity rather than defending its borders. Stage 5, the age of decadence. Military overextension, currency debasement, a ruling class that has forgotten how the machine was built, and a population that is told the machine is fine, while the vault runs empty. Stage 5 is where empires do not recover. They manage the decline. They issue reassurances. They point to the military and say, we are still strong. Which means the carrier groups in the Arabian Sea are not a sign of strength. They are a stage 5 symptom. The history is not abstract. The fingerprints are identical across every case file. Open the Spanish Empire, 1580 to 1640. Spain controlled the largest silver mining operation in the history of the world at Potosi, in what is now Bolivia, the Cerro Rico mountain. They extracted so much physical silver so fast that they broke their own currency. The influx of silver into the Spanish economy created a price spiral that consumed the empire from the inside. Inflation ran at levels that erased the purchasing power of the working population within a single generation. Which means Spain did not fall because it ran out of money. It fell because it had too much money printed too fast with nothing underneath it. The result is inevitable when you debase the unit of account. The math does not care about exceptionalism. Now, apply that template to the current file. The United States has not extracted silver from a mountain. It has extracted purchasing power from a printing press. Since 1971, the year President Nixon closed the gold window and severed the dollar, his last physical anchor, the Federal Reserve has expanded the money supply by a factor that would have been considered an act of war against the currency in any previous century. The mechanism is different. The mathematical consequence is identical. Open the British Empire, 1945 to 1956. Britain emerged from the Second World War as a nominal victor with a devastated balance sheet. The empire was intact on the map. It was insolvent in the ledger. In 1956, British Prime Minister Anthony Eden launched the Suez Crisis, a military intervention in Egypt to retake control of the Suez Canal after President Nasser nationalized it. The operation was militarily successful in its first phase, and then the United States told Britain to stop, not through diplomacy, through the bond market. The Eisenhower administration threatened to sell its holdings of British pound sterling bonds, which would have collapsed the pound and broken Britain's ability to finance its own government. Britain stopped, withdrew. And the world understood in that single moment that the British Empire was not the apex power anymore. Military capability intact, financial leverage gone, which means the empire did not end with a battle. It ended with a bond trade. Now apply that template to the current file. The IEPA cases before the Supreme Court today are not a legal technicality. They are a Suez moment in slow motion. If the court rules that the executive branch's emergency financial powers are constitutionally limited, every foreign central bank holding dollar reserves as a geopolitical shield receives the same signal Britain received in 1956. The weapon can be turned off, which means the weapon is not a weapon anymore. It is a bluff. And the Crink architecture has been studying that bluff for a decade. Now open the Roman file, because Rome is where the silver fingerprint becomes undeniable. In the 3rd century AD, Rome faced simultaneous military pressure on its northern and eastern frontiers. The response was identical to what you are watching today. Military spending increased. Tax revenue was insufficient to cover the expansion. So the Roman treasury debased the silver denarius. In 200 AD, the denarius was approximately 80% silver. By 260 AD, 60 years later, it was 2% silver, coated in a silver wash thin enough to fool a distracted eye. The soldiers were paid, the frontier was defended, and the internal economy collapsed in a price spiral that historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century, which means Rome did not fall to the barbarians. It fell to its own balance sheet. The barbarians just walked through the door that the debasement had already opened. Now look at the Congressional Budget Office data for 2026. Interest payments on the $34 trillion national debt are on a trajectory to exceed the entire United States defense budget within this fiscal year. Not next decade, this year. Which means the United States government will spend more money servicing the cost of past decisions than it spends on every aircraft carrier, every missile system, and every forward operating base on the planet. Combined. The denarius is not 2% silver yet. But the trajectory of the data is not ambiguous, and history is not repeating, it is rhyming. With a precision that should make every person watching this file reconsider what they think they know about the safety of their capital. 3 empires, 3 different mechanisms, 1 identical mathematical sequence. And the United States in 2026 sits at the intersection of all 3. The Spanish inflation trigger, the British leverage failure, the Roman debasement spiral, simultaneously. Here is what this file has established. A 15-day deadline that expired with no agreement. 16 cargo planes, 56 hours. A Supreme Court docket that could trigger a $1 trillion Treasury liability by June 2026. A registered silver vault draining at 20 million ounces per month. And a 250-year Imperial clock that has never once been wrong. These are not separate stories, they are one sequence. And the sequence has a direction. Most people will wait for the confirmation. The CNN banner, the Federal Reserve statement, the Treasury press release. By the time that confirmation arrives, the physical vault will be empty. The paper price of $78 per ounce will be a historical footnote, and the window that exists right now will be closed. The forensic circle exists for the people who do not wait for permission to read the data. If you are still here, you are already one of them. Subscribe. Every file we open next builds on this one. The next briefing maps the specific capital rotation sequence that 3 previous empires used in the 18 months before the reset became visible to the public. You do not want to receive that file late. This is the closing argument. You can strike down a tariff, you can redeploy a carrier group, you can issue a statement, but you cannot refill a vault that is already empty. And you cannot stop a 250-year clock that has already reached 0. 2026 is not a prediction. The math has already been written. You're simply deciding whether you read it now or after the fact.